Studies have suggested that some humans may have what is known as a mathematical brain, meaning that those who excel in mathematics have gray matter that works differently than those who don't. Now, what does this have to do with wrestling? Well, while further research is needed on the subject, I think I have found a correlation between math-minded people and the preference a wrestling fan has towards finishers. Now, this correlation may or may not hold water, but in the least you can guarantee that both of these two things do have at least one thing in common. They're both the topic of this episode, because today, Dave knows mathematical brains and wrestling finishers. So this correlation that I found may not exactly equal causation, but I definitely think that it's worth mentioning. And again, I do want to strongly remind you that further experimentation is still needed when it comes to the facts on math brains. But with that being said, let's get into the findings that we do have so far. According to Scientific American, there was a study published by the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences that reported that areas of the brain involved in math are different from those engaged in equally complex non-mathematical thinking. Now, to determine this, subjects were split into two groups. One group consisted of 15 professional mathematicians, and the other group consisted of 15 people who were non-mathematicians but were of equal academic standing as the first group. Then their brains were scanned while they listened to high-level mathematical statements, as well as high-level non-mathematical statements. And what the researchers found was that for the mathematicians, areas of the brain not usually associated with language became activated when they listened to the mathematical parts of the experiment. Now, this backs up previous reports that have been claimed by some that a similar reaction occurs for simple arithmetic or even just looking at numbers for mathematically minded people. Now, this does seem like a pretty big benefit for those who are mathematically inclined. But what about the reverse? Well, while listening to the non-mathematical statements, the non-mathematicians had the linguistic areas of their brains light up. No surprise there. However, what was surprising was that the same regions of the brain also activated for the mathematicians as well. This is probably because even if you are a math-minded person, you still think in and communicate with words, thus allowing you to access both sets of tools. Okay, so if you're not a math-minded person, are you just out of luck? Well, not necessarily, because what isn't clear is whether or not people are just born with mathematical ability or not. And there is evidence that suggests that learning and understanding advanced mathematical concepts alone might just grant a person the ability to activate those special parts of the brain. So even if you don't have a math brain now, you might be able to learn how to have one in the future. However, again, it's not certain whether or not the ability to understand these concepts in the first place is something that everybody is capable of. But alright, with a score of 2-1, it does seem like the mathematicians have a huge advantage over linguistically minded people. However, language people fear not, because there are definitely drawbacks to being mathematically minded as well. Because while basic language skills activate the same areas of the brain for both math-minded people and non-math-minded people, there is a finer level of communication that mathematicians tend to have less brain activity with: facial processing and body language. Again, more research is needed on this topic, but this is important to note for the hypothesis at hand, because in the modern day, we wrestling fans are left with an internal debate when it comes to wrestling finishers. Should it be one and done, or is kicking out of finishers an acceptable practice? Because it seems that wrestling fans can stand on either side of the line when it comes to this issue. But what if there was just a little bit of science to back either viewpoint up? Okay, so here it goes. When someone is more language-minded, they tend to focus more on facial recognition and body language. For those who are more linguistically inclined, they tend to process expressions of agony and pain on the face and body, which is all a part of selling and how they process when a person is portraying that they've had enough and are at their end. And if the finish of the match doesn't follow where the body language is telling us where the match is going, then everything just seems illogical. But on the other hand, it has been suggested that math heads gain their powers through an evolutionary trait that harkens back to the idea that accessing space and proportions is an advantage from our ancestors that aided in their survival. In which case, judging things in relation to other things and viewing events proportionally would affect how you judge things as a whole, even when it comes to wrestling. Which makes sense that there is a correlation between mathematical brains and people who say things like, "Oh, I can't believe Brock Lesnar pinned Samoa Joe after only one finisher," because the number one, mathematically, is disproportionate to the amount of F5s that, let's say, Roman Reigns has taken while still being able to continue the match. Because it would seem that mathematically minded people look for logic in terms of proportion to other events, meanwhile, language people look for logic in terms of a story. And furthermore to that point, the linguistically minded they definitely have a great desire for storytelling, and they want to see those stories go to fruition. If there is a clear place that closes the story, that's where they want to see the story end. And finishers, along with body language, gives them that perfect ending. And even by definition alone, the word finisher clearly implies the finish. And sticking to definitions is definitely a dominant trait of semantically minded people. But what do you think? Is there a connection between math brains and finisher kickouts? Let me know down in the comments, and don't forget to support me over on Patreon. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, this has been Dave Knows.